I never imagined that a single photograph could unravel the threads of my reality. But there I was, seated at the edge of an antique chaise long in my grandmother's dusty attic, staring at a small, curled black and white image of myself as a child. Except the eyes weren't mine. They belonged to Tabitha. I blinked, and the dim afternoon light filtered through a cracked skylight, casting prisms of dust motes that danced like unsettled spirits. My heart tightened as an echo of recognition settled in my bones. I was 27 years old, living a life I'd always believed to be my own, yet something in that photograph insisted otherwise. I lifted the picture gingerly, tracing Tabitha's slender jawline and the faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. The attic smelled of old cedar chests and mothballs, a muted perfume that clung to everything. My fingertips brushed the glassy surface, and for an instant I thought I felt a pulse, a tremor through my veins, as if the image itself was alive. At that moment, a whisper drifted through the rafters, soft as a sigh, "Find me." I spent the next several nights awake, the photograph perched on my bedside table like a silent sentinel. My dreams became landscapes of shifting shadows and half-remembered corridors. I wandered down long halls of candlelit mirrors that reflected not my face but Tabitha's, her eyes glossy and beckoning. Each time I reached out to touch her reflection, the glass would fracture, and I'd awake with the taste of ash in my mouth. I tried to dismiss it all as exhaustion, the residue of late nights spent drafting marketing pitches and scrolling through social media feeds. But colleagues at the agency began to notice changes in me. I would stare off into empty corners of the office, your voice calling my name only to find I was alone. Emails I never remembered writing appeared in my sent folder, confessions, pleas for help, references to places I'd never heard of. One message ended with a single line: "She waits beneath the willow." Compelled by a blend of dread and curiosity, I rented an old sedan and drove north, following no map but the thrum of that whisper. Autumn leaves flickered orange and red across the winding country roads until I reached a forgotten village nestled beside a quiet river. There, at the water's edge, stood an ancient weeping willow, its twisted branches brushing the surface like skeletal fingers. My pulse thundered in my ears as I approached, the photograph crumpled in my hand. Beneath the tree, the air felt colder, each breath a plume of mist swirling in circles. I knelt and pressed the photograph to the damp earth. The ground beneath me gave a low, resonant hum, and the willow's roots shifted as though alive. In the half-light, a figure emerged, a woman, pale as moonlight, hair drifting around her shoulders like silver smoke. Her eyes were Tabitha's eyes, and they burned with a sorrow that seemed to pull at my very soul. "Why have you come?" Her voice was distant, echoing as if from underwater. "I don't know," I confessed, voice quivering. "I only know you called me." She reached out, fingertips brushing mine. The world lurched. My vision blurred into vertigo. When the sensation cleared, I found myself standing in a room I did not recognize. Candles guttered along stone walls, their flames casting jittery shadows. At the far end lay a bed draped in crimson velvet, and upon it, Tabitha, my Tabitha, slept with a wound at her temple. My chest twisted with dread. "You see," the willow woman murmured. "You were always meant to find me." I stepped closer, the scent of sandalwood and damp stone filling my senses. "But who are you? And why am I here?" Tabitha's eyelids fluttered as though she heard me. Behind me, the willow woman's form began to dissolve into motes of light. A sudden gust snuffed out the candles, plunging the chamber into darkness. In that silence, I felt a tug, a chain of memories snapping free of some hidden lock. I recalled a life I'd never lived, laughter echoing through candlelit halls, the taste of sweet elderflower wine on my tongue, an unbreakable bond with someone I thought was myself. And then the betrayal, a secret ritual performed beneath a red moon, a bargain struck with a force older than time itself. When the candles flickered back to life, the bed was empty. The wound was gone, Tabitha nowhere to be seen. My fingers brushed against the linen sheets, warm as if she had just left. The attic photograph, now smeared with soil, lay ignited in my mind's eye. Tabitha had never been missing. She had been me. A soft voice behind me said, "You are home." I turned, expecting the willow's spirit, but found only a mirror-faced pool. In its depths, I saw Tabitha's face smiling back, and then mine, and then we were one. The hairs on my neck bristled as a breeze whispered through the chamber, "Remember." I felt the photograph dissolve in my hand, leaving only a memory that would never fade. The whisper didn't fade. It followed me out of the chamber, curling around my thoughts like smoke. I wasn't sure if I was walking or being pulled, but the stone corridor ahead seemed to stretch and bend, its walls breathing in slow, deliberate rhythm. My footsteps echoed, though I couldn't feel the ground beneath my shoes. A faint light appeared ahead, not candlelight, but something colder, like moonlight refracted through deep water. I stepped into a circular room, its domed ceiling painted with constellations I didn't recognize. In the center stood a pedestal, and on it, a small wooden box bound with tarnished silver clasps. My hands moved before my mind could stop them. The moment my fingers touched the lid, the air thickened, and the constellations above began to shift, rearranging themselves into a single unblinking eye. The box opened with a sigh. Inside lay another photograph, but this time it wasn't of me or Tabita. It was of a man standing beneath the same willow, his face obscured by shadow. In the corner of the image, scrawled in a hurried hand, were the words, "He knows." A sudden chill swept through the room, and I realized I was no longer alone. The man from the photograph stood in the doorway, his presence bending the air around him. His voice was low, almost kind, but threaded with something sharp. "You've taken what was never yours to see." I wanted to speak, to demand answers, but my throat locked. He stepped closer, and as he did, his shadow stretched unnaturally, spilling across the floor until it touched my shoes. The moment it did, the world inverted. The ceiling became the ground, the constellations became a black ocean above me, and I was falling upward. When I landed, I was back in my grandmother's attic. The skylight was gone, replaced by a square of night sky where stars pulsed like watchful eyes. The chaise longue was overturned, cedar chests split open, their contents scattered. And there, in the far corner, stood Tabita, not pale and spectral, but solid, breathing alive. "You've crossed too far," she said, her voice trembling. "Now he'll follow you." Before I could ask who he was, the attic door slammed shut. The air grew heavy, and the scent of sandalwood returned, stronger than before. Tabita stepped forward, pressing something into my palm, the same wooden box from the chamber. "Don't open it again," she whispered. "Not until the red moon rises." The floorboards groaned beneath us, and I realized the sound wasn't wood, it was roots, twisting and splitting through the planks, reaching for my ankles. Tabita grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the window. We climbed out into the cold night, the willow's silhouette visible in the distance, its branches swaying though there was no wind. Somewhere behind us, in the darkness of the attic, a man's voice murmured, "Too late." Night soaked into my skin like cold water. Tabita and I climbed down from the roof, and for the first time I noticed the old house was breathing in sync with us. When we paused, the walls grew still. The ribbed wooden box throbbed in my palm, warm as if someone had just been holding it. From the darkness of the stairwell came the scent of sandalwood and damp, a trail for the one who followed. "His name is the warden," Tabita whispered. "He keeps bargains and collects debts. Ours remains unpaid." Her voice sounded like a bell underwater, steady yet distant. "The red moon is already rising." We stepped outside, and the sky had indeed filled with ruby like wine spilled on a black tablecloth. The road to the Willow seemed shorter than it had by day, a tunnel in which time slipped away. No windows burned in the village. Houses waited like they were bracing for a verdict. The Willow's boughs reached for the water, and its roots had crawled out of the bank, bare and knotted like fingers. "Do you remember the bargain?" Tabita didn't look at me, only at the sheen of the moon in the river. My temples hammered. A memory of a long-locked door swung open without a creak, a red circle in the grass, 3 candles, a bottle of elderflower wine, and us, one soul in 2 shadows, begging time to stop. The warden's demand had been simple and cruel. For one to live, the other must sleep until a true memory was delivered. "A true memory is a sacrifice that can't be taken back," Tabita said. "You've already started paying the letters you supposedly wrote in your sleep. They weren't from the past. They were from what would have happened if you had erased me for good." My heart lurched. I recalled the lines in those sent messages, addresses that didn't exist, pleased to help me escape a mirror room. I thought they were hallucinations. But now I understood. I wrote them myself, from the room of stars that were and I, from that circle where time folded in two. The letters were a road map of the debt. He feeds on the unsaid. Tabita continued. Collect it all, and he comes to settle. The warden appeared without steps, like a stain of coal that had learned a shape. His face stayed in shadow, but his voice was startlingly gentle. Your debt has ripened, children of my silence. Open it. I opened the box despite every warning. Inside lay not an object, but a name. It rested there like a blade made of sound. When I spoke it, the river shuddered, and the willow trembled as if lungs lived in its trunk. The warden's name split the night. He stumbled, 1 second of imbalance opening a narrow passage. Only one breath, Tabita murmured. Now our chance. I can take the debt onto myself, I said, though my voice barely carried. Or we can close it another way. Tabita looked at me for the first time that night. There was no pleading in her eyes, only reflection. Another way is to rejoin what we once split. But someone will have to become the shore. I understood. The true memory wasn't a scene from the past. It was a decision that rewrote both lives. I slipped off a thin ring, my only constant since childhood, a thing I couldn't remember receiving. On its inside edge was a scratched mark, the same I from the domed room. The ring wasn't jewelry, it was a seal. I set it among the roots. I'm not giving up a memory. I'm giving up the right to lock us in, I said. Take the seal. The warden smiled the way those about to reap a harvest do. He reached out, and in that instant Tabita stepped forward and covered my hand with hers. 2 shadows merged. The seal flared like a crater under a moon. When the light died, we were somewhere else, my grandmother's cellar, which I hadn't known existed. The walls were papered with clippings about disappearances in our village across different years. In every photo, a face with my features or Tabita's, always alternating. At the center hung a large map of the river, the place under the willow circled in red. On the table lay my grandmother's journal. I couldn't sever them. I only learned to delay, she had written. You can't banish the warden. You can only transplant him. The last page was blank. I touched it. Words surfaced as if written that very moment. When the red moon comes, one becomes the shore. The other, the water. That way the silence takes no one whole. I felt the river inside me shift. What I had called a curse was an old method of surviving. We returned to the willow just as the moon reached its peak. I didn't draw a circle. Instead, we stepped into the water together up to our knees, holding each other's hands. Name yourself, Tabita asked. I am the one who remembers, I said. And I am the one who goes first, she answered. The warden appeared on the bank, his borrowed face impassive. Debts are not water, he reminded us. You cannot carry them across. You can transplant them, I said, and felt that same rhythm return in my chest, the one that had matched the house's breath. I lowered the box into the river. The water accepted it without a ripple. The willow's roots, like a vein, drew in the red glimmer. The warden fell silent. His shadow shrank to something merely human. The name I had spoken no longer cut the night. It settled on the riverbed like a stone. The world didn't overturn. It simply leveled, like letters aligning on a line when you find the right angle of light. Tabita and I stood in the water, and I knew. We were no longer one soul stretched thin through time, nor two of us doomed to mirror each other. We were shore and water. She would step first into the days that required courage. I would remain to remember and keep the channel, so she would always know the way back. The red moon paled. The willow exhaled, and its branches no longer grasped like fingers. They only brushed the current. The warden dissolved not into dust and not into mist, but into an expectation that no longer had an address. In the morning, I was back in my grandmother's attic. Light poured from the ceiling as if the window had been washed for the first time. On the floor lay a photograph, neither curled nor dim. In it, I was a child, and the eyes were mine. In the corner, a faint scratch in the shape of an eye. I placed the photo in a drawer, not as a secret but as a key. On my phone, an unread message from Tabita blinked, a single line. I'm by the willow. When it's time, I'll come. I smiled without a crack. I touched the glass, and it seemed the river in the house was breathing in unison with me again. To remember is also a path, and this time it's ours.